I've been tracking the rankings over the past few weeks, and these are going to be the largest risers that we have seen at wide receiver, and we'll throw in a tight end. Starting with the Atlanta guys, we all know why they're rising. I don't necessarily want to spend too much time on them. Talk about London briefly. London's up to wide receiver 10 in the community rankings. Now, I love London. Okay, I want to get that straight. We've said it a million times. Okay, we'll just reiterate for the 10th time in a row that this wide receiver goes to USC, plays alongside Michael Pittman Jr., Amon-Ra St. Brown. He breaks out, 18 years old, as a true freshman. Sophomore year, he's more productive than Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is a junior on that same roster. And then his junior year, he counts for like 45% of the offense at USC. I mean, the man was an absurd prospect, #1 wide receiver in the class easily 2 years ago, and really disappointing over the first 2 years of his NFL career. I mean, he's hovering around 53 receiving yards per game through the first 2 seasons. Obviously, that has a lot to do with the quarterback play that you've had in Atlanta. Some would argue it was the worst quarterback play that the NFL has seen over the past 2 seasons. I would say in Chicago is maybe a little bit worse if we're just looking at raw passing volume. But nonetheless, he has a horrible situation. And that's why if you go through and if you look at what you had from 21 and 22-year-old wide receivers through their first 2 NFL seasons, the guys that comp to Drake London since the year 2000 were George Pickens, Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, DeAndre Hopkins, Robert Woods, Kenny Britt. DeAndre Hopkins obviously turning into an elite level name, but outside of that, none of these other guys turned out to be just full-blown fantasy studs. But it's very difficult to just look at this raw data and say, oh, okay, this is the path that Drake London is for sure going to go down, because we have to remember, this is a wide receiver that was in one of the worst situations in the NFL. Cousins coming over should make this a top 10 offense in the NFL in terms of passing volume. I mean, hell, the Minnesota Vikings were top 5 over the past few years, but I'm going to assume Cousins gets worse coming off a torn Achilles, 35 years old, and a worse team overall. I don't think that London's as good as Jefferson. I mean, Kyle Pitts, I don't think he's as good as Hawkinson. I mean, I don't know, Darnell Mooney's as good as Jordan Addison. So the situation gets a little bit worse for Cousins. He gets a little bit older. He's less healthy. I think the offense is worse than what you see in Minnesota. But still, nonetheless, it makes sense that London is hovering around a top 10 asset overall. I would make the argument, however, if I could move off of Drake London and instead pivot to Jalen Waddle, pivot to Tyreek Hill, pivot to Chris Olave. Those are 3 wide receivers that are in the same range that have proven to be productive at the NFL level. Waddle and Olave, each respectively, have been top 15 wide receivers in fantasy, and they are both still young. They're not as young as London. London's only 22, Waddle's 24, Olave is 23. Regardless, all of these guys fit in that mold where they are cornerstone assets where you can contend with them in the short term and they have long-term value. So while I'm pretty confident that Drake London will take this next step forward, and I think London is going to be a great wide receiver, for me to value him over Jalen Waddle, where we've already seen Waddle be a great wide receiver at the NFL level, and where Waddle in his own right was also a phenomenal prospect, he was a top 10 NFL draft pick, it does seem a little aggressive to have him over Waddle. So if this is the price point of Drake London now, wide receiver 10, like I said, I would probably prefer Olave. I would probably prefer Waddle. The 105 in a super flex league where maybe you can get Malik Neighbors. I think honestly, maybe prefer Neighbors. Still love London, the player. There are clear reasons why you should be super excited about him. Going over to Kyle Pitts, I mean, Kyle Pitts is a year younger than Tank Dell. He's younger than Zay Flowers. Talked about this ton. Don't want to spend too much time. I mean, he's averaged about 46 receiving yards per game through the first 3 years of his career. The best season back in 2021 as a rookie, as a 21-year-old rookie tight end. I mean, I was excited about him going into 2022 because he comes out, he's the best tight end prospect of all time. He's arguably the best rookie tight end of all time, as the youngest tight end of all time. So, I mean, Kyle Pitts looked like an incredibly special player. He has fallen back down to earth over the past 2 years. But if you pull up the road of his creator and look at comps that you've had from tight ends that are 21 through 23 years old, I mean, guys that comp similar since the year 2000 were Hawkinson, Noah Fant, Devin Funchess. He transitioned to tight end later on. He started off as a receiver. Eric Ebron, Gronk, Jermaine Gresham, Jason Witten, and Todd Heap. So, I'm a pretty damn good list to be a part of if Gronk is in your range of outcomes. If you look at the price point with Pitts, currently being valued as tight end 3, right in the same range as like Andrews, Hawkinson, Kincaid. I personally may rather have Hawkinson. Hawkinson's still incredibly young, and we've seen the production, but obviously Hawkinson's coming off a significant injury. Now, going over to another wide receiver we've talked about, so I'm going to be brief. George Pickens is up to wide receiver 25. This is a wide receiver that takes a significant step forward this past season, where he goes from 47 receiving yards per game as a rookie up to 67. Keep in mind, pretty young player, started off his rookie season only 21 years old. I mean, if we're looking at 21-year-old wide receivers through their first 2 seasons that look similar to George Pickens statistically, you had Drake London, Jerry Jeudy, Chris Godwin, DeAndre Hopkins, Robert Woods, Kenny Britt. I mean, looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback situation, it arguably has been just as bad as what the Atlanta Falcons have dealt with over the past 2 years. If we are looking at the adjusted yards per pass attempt marks, Kenny Pickett and obviously Mitchell Trubisky have been absolutely train wrecks. Now, I'm not necessarily a massive fan of Russell Wilson. Y'all know I'm not a big fan of Justin Fields. But I will say that I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers did probably the best that they could in free agency. And honestly, I think it makes so much sense what they decided to do. They're paying like $1 million for Russ. They're paying like a 6th round pick for Justin Fields. Both of them are essentially 1-year prove-it type situations where if either one of them turns out to be good, that's great. You invested nothing into them, and hell yes, it's all upside. Where both of them turn out to be very bad, which is a possibility, then hell, you're still in a situation where next offseason, you can go out there and make a play for a quarterback. It's not like you give Russell Wilson $100 million guaranteed where you're going to be stuck in that situation for years to come. So I think the Pittsburgh Steelers have put themselves in a very nice spot at quarterback where you have upside, but you're not locking in a ton of long-term risk. Worst case scenarios, it's an ugly quarterback situation for just this season. And if we're looking at George Pickens, now that you have the departure of Deontay Johnson, Deontay's one of these wide receivers that commands a lot of volume, that doesn't necessarily stretch NFL defenses, that doesn't boost the efficiency of your offense. So I think Deontay leaving to Carolina should be a really good thing for Pickens. Now, going over to a player that just got $41 million guaranteed. I mean, Jerry Jeudy's agent should be seeing half of that contract. I have no idea how this happened. Jerry Jeudy is now risen up to being the wide receiver 41. Jerry Jeudy is currently valued around a mid-second round pick in rookie drafts this year, according to the community rankings on flogfantasy.com. Of course, these are the community rankings. They're completely free for any of y'all to check out. If you ever want to see them, just pull up flogfantasy.com. If you want to see my rankings, just hit add filter, add creator, and then you can hit Mason Dodd, you can hit Corey Bush, you can hit anybody that you want. We have pretty much everybody watch on YouTube. And yeah, if you want to check out any of those rankings behind the paywall or Dynasty Trade Calculator, all the premium content, including a ton of Dynasty rookie draft guides, find all that on flogfantasy.com. Code FLOG could give you 30% off any sub. And yours truly will break down your Dynasty Fantasy Football team with the podcast with code FLOG. But anyway, going back over to Jerry Jeudy, is a wide receiver that's been really up and down throughout his entire NFL career. Showed a lot of promise his first season in Denver, where he goes out there, he has 53 receiving yards per game. I mean, as a 21-year-old rookie, that is pretty exciting. I mean, if you remember Jerry Jeudy, this is someone that a lot of people had ranked over CeeDee Lamb coming out of college, someone that a lot of people had ranked like kind of neck and neck with CeeDee Lamb after year 1 as well. I mean, you should have kind of seen the path that they were on, but nonetheless, I mean, going into year 2, Jerry Jeudy takes a step back, 46 receiving yards per game. Year 3 is best year of his career at 23 years old. He has 64. This past season, another step backwards. But I do want to point out that Jerry Jeudy back in 2022, in the best season of his career, this was the first year with Russ, and you get pretty much Russ the entire season. Let's go through and let's look at the quarterback situation every year since 2020, because this is another player that, very similar to everybody on this list, has dealt with very bad quarterback play. In 2020, Jerry Jeudy had 13 games started from Drew Lock, 1 game from Jeff Driscoll, 1 game from Brett Rippon. And none of those quarterbacks are relevant anymore. Very bad quarterback play. 2021, you had 14 games from Teddy Bridgewater, 3 games from Drew Lock. None of those guys are relevant anymore. They're both out. I mean, is this the game where you had, season where you had Kendall Hinton starting, or was that 2020? I don't know. Regardless, horrible quarterback play in 2021. You go to 2022, you had 15 games from Russ. You had 2 games from Brett Rippon. And then in 2023, you had 15 games from Russ, 2 games from Jarrett Stidham. So Jerry Jeudy in his own right has dealt with some of the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL over the past 4 years. Very similar to these other players. If you're looking at the first 4 years, starting at 21 years old, 21-year-old wide receivers, the first 4 years of their NFL career, that comp similar to Jerry Jeudy with what they did on the field. Chase Claypool, Michael Gallup, Jamison Crowder, Davante Adams. Adams is going to be very skewed here because if you remember Davante Adams, it's not like he had a season or start of his career like Jerry Jeudy, where Jerry Jeudy was pretty much mediocre throughout the entire ride. Instead, Davante Adams was just straight up buns for the first 2 years. And then by the time he broke out and he was legit. So kind of a different story. Robert Woods, Michael Clayton, Antonio Bryant, Steve Smith. So what you're really hoping for here is you're hoping that he's Robert Woods. All right. You're hoping that he goes over to Cleveland and all of a sudden he finds himself in a situation where they're going to lean on him based on the money that they give him. And if you're drafting him as a wide receiver 41 when he's going to be 25 years old this next season, and he can be a wide receiver 3 for you in fantasy for years to come, it's a fine play, but understand the format that you'd want to go after Jerry Jeudy in. If you're playing in like a 10-team league where you only start 8 guys, you have absolutely no reason to be going after Jerry Jeudy. Because say, hypothetically, you're in that 10-team league where you only start 8 players. You go through, you draft Jerry Jeudy wide receiver 41, and he ends up hitting. Instead of him being wide receiver 41, he's wide receiver 26. He's a high-end wide receiver 3 for year in and year out. And it's on paper a good pick. It's on paper a profitable selection for you. But if you're playing in that 10-team format where you only start like 8 guys, would the wide receiver 26 ever make a difference? Ever? No. They simply just won it. If you really need to rely on a player like that, you're just not ready to contend and you're better off rebuilding anyway. The format that would make sense if you're a Jerry Jeudy believer and you wanted to go out there and pay this price for him, and we can say the same thing with our next guy in Hollywood, is if it's a start 11, 12 team format. If it's a start 12, 12 team format. Maybe even if it's a start 11, 10 team league. Where if all of a sudden you're starting 6 wide receivers from a week-to-week perspective, if you're including your wide receiver slots and your flexes, and you're going, well, yeah, Mason, I'm going to draft Jerry Jeudy as wide receiver 41, but in this format where I need to start 6 receivers, essentially, if he turns out to be a wide receiver 3, that's going to move the needle. That's going to help me a lot because those players are harder to find in a format like that. So understand the league that you're in. Understand where it's advantageous to go after these wide receivers that have cap ceilings. You've seen Jerry Jeudy in the NFL for 4 years. Even if he dealt with horrible quarterback play, we can safely say that he has a cap ceiling based off what we've seen over and over and over again. So just understand if you are going after those guys where we should. Hollywood Brown, another player that over the past few years has dealt with very bad quarterback play. I mean, in 2022, he had 11 games with Kyler, then Kyler goes down. Then you have 4 games, Colt McCoy, a game with Trace McSorley, 2 games with David. Going over to 2023, you had 8 games with Joshua Dobbs start off the season. Kyler comes in. Kyler's not necessarily 100%. You look at the splits with and without Kyler Murray for Hollywood. With Kyler, he averaged about 53 receiving yards per game. Without Kyler, he was at about 44.9. So, I mean, we can safely say that Hollywood Brown, just like every other one of these wide receivers, has dealt with very bad quarterback play for the past 2 seasons. We go over and look at where he's currently valued now that he's going to be a Kansas City Chief, and he is directly after an early 2nd round pick this year, and he's directly before Chris Godwin and Calvin Ridley. If we just get a baseline expectation, like I said, this is just a small little window to hit the reset button and have a base understanding of what the expected range of outcomes is for a player. Just because this is what the historical data says doesn't necessarily mean you need to listen to this one for one, but it's a good starting point. Then you can take into consideration, oh, the quarterback play was bad. Oh, the quarterback play is going to be better going forward. So let's go through and let's juice our numbers in his mind a bit. If the median projections maybe 10 points per game going forward, maybe instead of the situation's dramatically better, you give him the benefit of the doubt and you go 12, 13 points per game. But if we know the median projection's 10 points per game going into the future based off historical data, you kind of understand if you are just going crazy, if all of a sudden you're projecting him out to have 20 points per game and we've never seen someone of his profile do it. But anyway, the guys that were 24, 25, 26 that had a similar run as Hollywood include Tyler Boyd, Allen Robinson, Jarvis Landry, Steve Johnson, Steve Smith, Dwayne Bowe, Hines Ward, Marty Booker. Now, a lot of these players like Allen Robinson and Jarvis Landry were great early on in their careers. They fell off, and when they were in their late 20s, they weren't necessarily productive assets that you were excited about building around. But nonetheless, that doesn't necessarily mean Hollywood's going to fit that same mold. A big thing that I want to look at with Hollywood Brown is the profile of a wide receiver that he is, right? This is a wide receiver that is a speedster. This is a wide receiver that typically is going to provide a ton of efficiency for the offense that he is in, because he's going to take attention from safeties and defensive coordinators to make sure he doesn't beat them over the top. We know a lot of times these guys are going to get drafted higher than their fantasy football value indicates in the NFL draft. They're going to get paid larger contracts than what their fantasy football value would indicate. Go through and look at the contract that the Chiefs gave Marquez Valdes-Scantling a few years back. They paid him that money, not thinking, oh yeah, that's going to be a guy that goes out there, grabs 80 receptions for us. That is 1,000 receiving yards for us. They pay him that money knowing, okay, he has speed. Hopefully he can grade space underneath for Travis Kelce in our running game. That's my baseline expectation of like a Hollywood Brown profile. So I was under the assumption that this would be someone that gets paid in free agency. He's signing a one-year prove-it deal with $6.5 million. You're getting $6.5 million for Hollywood Brown in comparison to $41 million guaranteed for Jerry Jeudy. Now, of course, one gets to play with Patrick Mahomes. The other has to go to Cleveland. So maybe make the argument, well, Mason, maybe Hollywood Brown takes a team-friendly deal so he can prove himself with Mahomes and he can find a better contract from someone else. Heard the same story before with Juju Smith-Schuster, by the way. Maybe I fell for it. I honestly don't even remember. It was so long ago. But nonetheless, if we're looking at this going into the future, I don't think it bodes well for Hollywood Brown, this contract. If you're like an underdog best ball draft, then maybe you can take the shot on him, expecting that we get some pretty big spike weeks. However, if you're sitting here in your Dynasty League and you're going to have to make the bet on Hollywood as wide receiver 33, I think I would rather take someone like Ridley. I think I'd rather take someone like Godwin, or I'd rather package together Hollywood in like the 109 and see if we can get up inside the top tier and go get like the 106. So we can use his name value and go get a player that actually may move the needle if we can get inside that top 6 tier for Dynasty rookie drafts. But I do want to remind you, understand the format that you're playing in, because if you draft Hollywood or you trade for Hollywood and he ends up being a wide receiver 3, maybe that helps you out a lot in a 12-team league where you start 11 guys. Whereas if you're in like a 10-team format where you start 8 players, it just doesn't really have the upside to move the needle. But I think that's all I got for you. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you hit that like button. Hope you subscribe to the channel. And I hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.